I think sadly, due to the decline in retailing as we knew it and know it in terms of the high street, that's obviously had a very dramatic effect on our town centres. Also that we don't necessarily sufficiently define between what is a town centre and a city centre. And they're, as I'm sure everybody would agree, they're two very, very different things. So if we're looking at regeneration and the things that we need to do in order to bring that inspiring and interacting, exciting space back in a manner in which historically may have been the case, we're dealing with a lot of fracture and a lot of damage that may have been done for various reasons over the decades. And we've really got to prepare ourselves for huge change, embrace that change, ensure that the councils, the public sector and the private sector really work more closely together to prepare and deliver solutions which respond to that community. It is all about people, and that we go back to, as I was joking with the guys when we had a briefing last week, you know, I learnt about retail because I was selling potatoes on a stall with my father when I was 5. And that's how I've ended up making a living from retail design most of my life. Not what I learnt at architecture school, design school, or becoming a building physicist. It was about selling product. So that product selling, creating and responding to people, interaction with people, whether it's public and private sector working together, the regeneration of beautiful spaces that we have in our towns across the country, responding and contextual to that place.
I'm going to go big picture, guys. I'm going to go big picture, so indulge me, and you look like a really intelligent audience, so I think you're ready for this. I think you're absolutely ready for this. So it wasn't really that long ago in the context of human history that we had societies that were mainly based around agriculture and farming and individual craftsmen. And then you have iron and steel and cotton, and you have the original industrial revolution, which is really the backbone of all the modern industrial cities we have today. And that completely transformed British society and the way we live and the way we trade and the way we work, and it's transformed the global society at the same time. So not too long after, we have a second industrial revolution, which is those same industrial processes happening in other parts of the world. And what that means, it's a zero-sum game. What that means is that many of our towns, many of our cities have seen their economic base be depleted as a result. We've seen the deindustrialization of many towns and cities, and the knock-on impact that has had on local economies on different generations. We are still seeing the legacy of that impact today, not least through a certain slightly controversial fund which was announced yesterday, which I won't go into too much because, hey, that's a whole nother level of debate. But it doesn't stop there. The third industrial revolution around digital, that has been really disruptive. I mean, in terms of the retail economy in the high street, it's completely transformed the way we engage with businesses. It's transforming the way we work and the way we live and the way we play. And we have not got our heads around the second industrial revolution. We haven't even started to really consider the long-term implications of the third industrial revolution. And we are already at the start of a fourth industrial revolution, which is about artificial intelligence. And that is particularly scary because a lot of those deindustrial towns that have managed to pick themselves up, regenerate themselves and find a future for themselves have done so around the knowledge economy, which has become a big part of many towns and city centres. If we are talking about artificial intelligence, then what do you think is going to change first? It is that knowledge economy. And so when we think about town centres going forward, when we think about the future, we absolutely need to think about what that future looks like in terms of, in the context of this rapidly accelerating change in industry. And from the conversations I've had with various stakeholders, that change is only going to accelerate. It's going to get quicker. It's going to get much harder to predict. The technology is getting much easier to use. I've heard of a Japanese farmer that is able to build his own app which allows him to select the cucumbers he needs. A farmer can do that. If a farmer can do that, then the next generation coming through, the back end of the millennials and Generation Z, God knows what they will be able to achieve with nothing but a laptop and a bit of Wi-Fi. And so in terms of innovation, we do not know what comes next. All we can do is just make sure we design town centres that have a purpose. Enterprise, education, healthcare, community, those key things which remain fundamental, because everything else aside from that, we are just working with complete uncertainty in terms of what comes next.
I just have a few things I'd like to say. One of them is around a fabulous quote by Jane Jacobs, which is how we need to think of our city centres and our town centres as somewhere where the theatre of life can thrive. And, if we think to the future and also back to the past, the one thing that remains constant is us, is people. And, once we've set aside our obsession with shops, which we seem to be doing, we have to think about how to reinvent our city centres, our town centres. And I think it's as simple as just making sure there's a lot of stuff to do that isn't just shopping. And I think that if we can reinvent our high streets, because we can think to the future and we can think about these incredible technical, the opportunities that new technical and new. What am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that things will change. Of course they will change, but we have an infrastructure that isn't going to change that easily or quickly. We are stuck with our town centres, and however much money we are given or not given, we have to work with the existing infrastructure. So I think we have to be inventive about how we repurpose those city centres, and I think you've shown some really good examples of how that happens. And that is about innovation. That is about making sure our city centres become communities again. The only other thing I would like just to add is a little pitch for some work that we're doing at the National Infrastructure Commission. One of the next projects that we are looking at is around our cities programme. We have asked government to provide cities outside of London with an additional £43 billion of additional investment by 2040. And that is combined with better and control, because we believe that actually it isn't just the sort of granular detail that will bring our cities and our town centres back, but it's also a bigger sort of strategic look at how we plan for the future, how we make sure that our transport infrastructure, the homes and jobs that we need are properly integrated, are properly planned for and properly understood. How we make sure that when we talk about our city centres, we do have to think about how efficiently we use our road space, how urban freight, how all these incredible deliveries that we are, pinging on the internet are actually going to be delivered. There are really big, complex issues that we need to think about, and how we do that and make sure that we can breathe clean air within our cities. So I think technology and future-proofing has a lot to do with it, and I think, but actually proper devolution to those towns and cities, to those people, those communities, those local authorities who really understand what it is that's needed and how best to spend money is the right way. And so I think governance is something that is super important too, as well as all that lovely other stuff.
We start this discussion from a sense that places matter, but we also need to recognise, I think, that place matters. A town centre in Wales is not the same as a town centre in an old coalfield district in the north of England. And some of the discussions around town centres tend to focus on the architecture, but as well as the buildings, there are the people. And there are some things about the people that we know and we can predict. So 3 things I want to say very quickly. One on demographics, one on practices, and one on mobilities. So on demographics, we know that the population in Britain is getting older. We know it is more diverse. We know that there are connections between obscure places in Yorkshire with old far domains of the Raj. We know that those connections create new demographics about who's in the town centre, but also connections between places, which make sometimes for exciting ways of thinking about places differently. But as we know people get older, we know that people marry later, divorce earlier, stay single longer, live in different lifestyles, different sexualities, different ways of living. That those demographics are known. So if we're thinking about making town centres better, if we're thinking about making town centres more prosperous, we can understand them through the lens of the people that will be walking through them. And in that context, the practices, the second point I'd make, picks up on what we just heard. 20, 30 years ago, we might have thought about town centres Monday to Saturday, 9 to 5. Spaces now are not always 24/7, but they are different hours, 7-day economies. What that means, what does it mean to make a town centre friendly to a demographic that is largely over 60, 65? Why do people come to the town centre beyond shopping, as we've just heard? What kinds of experience are people looking for? Some of the examples we just heard. These kinds of practices are built on what we absolutely at heart know, which is that people look for each other in public spaces that are people-friendly. And that has to be at the heart of any future of any successful town centre, which comes, I guess, thirdly, to the point about mobility and how people get there. Because we have lived in a world dominated by the car. Cars can kill town centres and they can make them live. Town centres that are cycle-friendly, pedestrian-friendly, friendly for those new demographics are not easily built, but there are certain principles that we know can be built into the DNA that actually makes those spaces that are attractive. But to end with where I began, those spaces are spaces for people, but in particular places, in particular geographies. Will Alsop, the architect, in his kind of exploration of the north, which was not without its problems, I think, that gave us very great examples like the one Sarah showed us at the beginning, had ideas for other places, and one of which was a sense that Barnsley might be a Tuscan hill village. And in part, this is kind of southern architect insulting through a northern exploration. We were working in Barnsley at the time, and the point that we have to recognize, I think, is that Peter Sloterdijk, the German philosopher, has a kind of set of principles for design. And one of his principles is the principle of humility, right? Which I think in that example might be slightly lacking, but the other was more interesting, actually. Sloterdijk's other principle, one of his other principles at least, was that no design builds from a tabula rasa. No design comes ex nihilo, from the blank. We build on what is there. We have to use our imagination to create something from what exists already. And I was actually talking to a bunch of trade unionists and local people at the time in Barnsley when that Alsop show came on. And there was a sense about what Barnsley might mean in a post-coalfield economy. It's a very beautiful place. It has extraordinary nature around the culture of a small town. It was at least an act of imagination that thought about how we might build on something in the future from what is there in the present. We build our future from the ruins of the past, right? And I think it's in that spirit that you can build on what you know about people to create places that work.
So you wonder, why am I playing Ghost Town by the Specials? Well, I'm a proud Coventrian. I was there in '81 when this was out in the charts. I was a DJ and I played this. And I played this not because I was worried about the shopping being so crap. I was playing this because I was in a place that wasn't working. I was in a city where there was urban disturbance, where communities were not talking to each other, and actually very usefully found the city centre as a great place to go and try and kill each other. So the point I'm making, and it's an important point, and that point is city centres are not just nice, fluffy little places where we go and have coffee. It's where we go and say, actually, we're very angry and we're not happy. And we want to have a dialogue about things that aren't working. And so I think the important message for me is that city centres are about disruption, tension, grit, and change. So shopping, yeah, great, but let's have some voice. Okay, that's message number one. On a more serious level, I also think that we ought to discuss today a number of things, some key themes. And I think town centres, and what is very interesting, what Michael said, was that town centres are not town centres or city centres on their own. They're about shaping identity and character for cultures to thrive in. Those differences have to be eked out of each individual place. If we are not allowed to do that, and that's why I feel passionately the death of the big multinational shopping arcade, the shop that is everywhere, the death of that shop, sad though it is in terms of employment, is in a way great for identity. So that, for me, is a great start. I will also say, I want cities to be a lot denser, and that density brings footfall, it brings life, it brings difference and change, and it welcomes different types of characters of people. And I think the denser that we can do with good design, and that's, I think the most of us here are probably designers in the built environment. If we can build great cities that are well designed, we can increase density. I think my final couple of notes are around governance. Without the politicians standing up and being counted and helping us change what it is that clearly things do need to change, we're not going to get anywhere. And I think there are a number of issues that we need to talk about in this. If we're going to have questions, it'd be great to talk about how use classes need to be more flexible, for example. We need to understand how a 4-year local authority timetable is not long enough. You know, the big infrastructure issues are for 10, 15, 20 years. How do we get those things through? And it's about other things around democratizing local authorities, giving them more power, giving them the ability to raise taxes, for example, giving them the opportunity to actually deal with their own communities locally. So there are all sorts of questions that I think would be great to discuss today. So thank you.